for all Christians, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, the one thing that is indispensable, if you are going to call yourself a Christian, the one thing that is indispensable, it is the fact that Jesus is King and we believe in him. And really, once we've got that piece in place, everything else follows suit. So as we come and talk about acceptable sins, we need to recognize that we are forfeiting blessing and we are destroying our fellowship if we ignore these things. Unless Jesus is King, practically, not just in word, but also in deed, we're going to lose out on blessing in our own lives, and our fellowships, or when we get together as a community, it is going to disrupt and destroy and corrupt and decay. So that's why we want to pay attention to Ephesians chapter 4, this section starting in verse 17 and following, because these acceptable sins are really not acceptable at all. Today we're going to come to Ephesians 4, verse 29. Ephesians 4, verse 29 says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." And I have to admit to you, I really wanted to go off on a tangent with this one. I really wanted to talk about different types of words and different ideas that have to do with how we speak and what we speak. But that's not what our text here says. You know what? Someday I'm going to preach other texts that deal with those things that I wanted to talk about. But I'm going to stick to what Paul wrote to the Ephesians in Ephesians 4:29. And as I was looking through this text and reading and doing my translation work this morning, I was struck by the parallels between our words and other things in our world. The images Paul uses, or the images that he sort of brings to the front, or the language, the connotation of the words, reminded me of apples and steel. What an odd metaphor. Apples and steel and words is the title of my sermon this morning. And the first thing I noticed was that our words can be like apples. Paul says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths." Don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths. Other translations may have different words there where the NIV uses unwholesome, but the idea is that of rottenness and decay. It says, do not let any rotten, decay-causing words come out of your mouth. I want to read to you a short article that was written, it comes from McGill University website. It was written by Joe Schwartz, PhD. And the title of the article is, "Can one rotten apple spoil the whole barrel?" Have you ever heard that expression before? In fact, I think there's a song that says that one bad apple doesn't spoil the whole bunch. Well, unfortunately for the songwriter, one bad apple does spoil the whole bunch. Let me read to you what Joe Schwartz wrote. "Is there any truth to the expression, one rotten apple spoils the whole barrel? You bet. Because once an apple is rotten, it has physical damage, i.e. a bruise, it produces ethylene, which in turn leads to a slightly increased internal temperature, causing the breakdown of chlorophyll and the synthesis of other pigments. The starch in the fruit is converted to simple sugars, and at the same time, pectin, a component of fiber that cements the cell walls together, begins to disintegrate, thereby softening the tissue. Once this happens, it starts a chain reaction, stimulating the process in other apples. This ripening and or spoiling is usually undesired, unless, of course, you want to ripen bananas. How? Well, put a green banana into a bag with a ripe cut apple and watch what happens. Ta-da, the banana ripens. Forget about ripening banana. I give you that little tidbit, so if you ever have a green banana and you want to ripen it, toss a rotten apple in and apparently it'll ripen the banana quicker. I want to focus on the fact that rotten apples don't just impact themselves. There is actually a physical and chemical process that takes place, and apples spoil one another. And what's remarkable is Paul tells people that's exactly what our words do. Do not let any unwholesome, rotten, decaying words come out of your mouth. Why? Because those unwholesome, rotten, decaying words change people and things around you. And the problem is that our words matter. Our words genuinely, honestly matter. If you have your Bibles, turn to Matthew chapter 12. Do you want a great diagnostic test to tell where your heart is when it comes to your words? Or you want a great diagnostic test to see if you have any unwholesome words in your vocabulary that you've made a habit of using? Watch the words that you feel don't really matter. Watch those moments where you are the least guarded in your speech, and you will learn a lot about yourself. Now, there are times where we have a freedom to speak with one another that we don't have in other more formal or different situations. There are things that I say to my wife that I wouldn't necessarily say in a group of people that I don't know very well. There's an intimacy within our relationship that allows me to speak in ways I wouldn't speak elsewhere. So I'm not saying here that what you say should always be the same everywhere, that if you can't speak it here, you shouldn't speak it there. No, there are times where certain words are appropriate, and places where those words are appropriate, and other places where you wouldn't want to share them. It is a foolish decision to bare your soul to people who are not necessarily trustworthy with those deep hurts and heartaches. So that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is, pay attention to those moments where you are the least guarded in your speech. Because what we find in Matthew chapter 12, 30 to 37, listen to what he says here, Jesus says. Matthew 12, 33 to 37, Jesus says, "Make a tree good and its fruit will be good, or make a tree bad and its fruit will be bad. For a tree is recognized by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything good? For out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks." You hear what Jesus is saying there? What comes out of your mouth is a reflection of what's going on in your heart. And many of us are very good at saying the right things when we're very focused on the people we're talking to and the situations we're speaking in. Have you ever noticed that? Some people can be very respectful to another person's face, but the moment their back is turned, the respect evaporates. And there is biting, there is criticism, there is spiteful language. That is the true condition of the heart, not the formal sort of face-to-face, but when the back is turned. Because out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good man brings out good things that he has stored up in him. The evil man brings up evil things out of the evil that is stored up in him. But I tell you, listen to this very carefully, men will have to give an account on the day of judgment for every careless word they have spoken. Do you want to know whether there are rotten, decaying words in your vocabulary? Pay attention to when you're not paying attention. Listen to the words you speak when you carelessly speak. When the words seem to matter the least, that is when your heart is revealed most clearly, with high definition. For by your words, Jesus said, you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. The first instruction, the first command here is that words are like apples. Don't let rotten, decaying ones leave your mouth. I suppose if I'm going to say words are like apples, don't put rotten ones in your mouth either, but the metaphor doesn't work quite as well the other way around. You get the point though, right? There's no room in the believer's life for rotten, decaying words. Then Paul continues. He says, and remember we talked about replacement behavior? It's not just that we're not speaking, it's what we're speaking needs to change. He says, but only what is helpful for building others up to benefit those who listen. Not only should we leave behind rotten words, but we should be taking up beneficial, blessing words. Words that edify, words that are helpful, words that build others up according to their needs. Our words can be like heat to steel. Our words can be like heat to steel. Let me read you another article. This one is taken from Specialty Steel Treating Incorporated. They write in one of their blog articles, achieving the perfect metal properties often requires heat. There are many different ways that heat can alter the properties of metal. Some of those methods include case hardening, tempering steel, precipitation hardening, vacuum heat treatment. However, does the heating of metal make it weaker? Here are some of the common ways that heat treating metals changes the basic properties of the strength of the metal. Now, I'm going to continue reading. I need you to know, I know far more about botany and other forms of biology than I know about metallurgy. So if I mispronounce these, and I realize I live right next to Steel Town, okay? So anyone who's bringing criticism over my pronunciation or understanding, I apologize in advance. But heat will transform the structure of metal. By displacing atoms, heat can form new metallic structures, also known as allotropic phase transformation. It can impact magnetism. Perhaps the most common way that heat makes metal permanently weaker is with magnetic charge. Heating nickel, iron, and cobalt to temperatures ranging from 626 to 2012 degrees Fahrenheit can cause these metals to completely lose their magnetism. There's also thermal expansion. This transformation is not only used when crafting metal products, but it can also be a liability. Metals expand in volume, length, and surface area as they heat up. This can continue to occur even as the metal is shaped and put to use. So everything from sewer pipes to bridge cables need to account for thermal expansion. Later on the article goes, in short, the answer to the question regarding making metal weak is yes. However, only for some metals. The process of annealing can soften a variety of metals. Brass, steel, iron, copper, and silver can all be made weaker by heating the metal to a set temperature and cooling it slowly. It is not only used to create softer metal, but it produces more electrically conductive ones. You hear what it's saying? The metal may be softened, but it will conduct electricity far better. However, it would be incorrect to state that heat always makes metal weaker. Hardening is another process used by heat treating companies to actually create more durable metal components. This is used for steel and similar alloys. It creates hard yet brittle metal. Another popular process where heat is used to alter metal is tempering. Tempering increases the ductility of hardened steel. Do you know what ductility is? It's the ability to bend. So wire is ductile. Metal wire is ductile because you can bend it without snapping it, right? So if I take the knife that I have in my pocket here, right? I've got a steel knife. If I were to bend the blade of this knife, right? It's not like wire, is it? I'd basically ruin the knife. So the ductility of steel can be altered through the use of heat. I don't know why in my video on the internet I just took out a knife and threatened my audience with it, but it is used to keep the benefits of the hard steel with less brittle qualities. That's tempering. Finally, normalizing alloys is another common way to treat metal used in heating. It's within a temperature range. It can create a more pure, hard metal. It is often used to create steel that is stronger than nailing metal, but also creates less ductile of a product. So, and here's the point, heat can indeed make metal weaker. However, there are many processes where metal is strengthened by heat. The alloy, temperature range, and cooling methods all need to be considered before determined whether metal will increase or decrease its hardness through heat treatment. The point of the fact is, heat doesn't always weaken the metal, and how we apply it and the methodology used will change the properties of the metal. And why does that matter? Because the purpose for which you're making the metal part or product will determine what properties you want it to have, right? So they talked about a bridge cable. There are certain properties that you want a cable on a suspension bridge to have. You don't necessarily need those same properties in a garden tool or in my pocket knife. Listen, what Paul is saying here is that our words can be like heat to steel. Applying the right heat or cooling at the right time allows you to give the properties you need for the purpose at hand. Applying the right heat or cooling at the right time allows you to give the properties you need for the purpose at hand. Does the metal need to be hard? Does it need to be magnetized? Does it need to be drawn into thin wire? Now listen again to what Paul said in the verse. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs. That means there are going to be some words you speak at some moments and you withhold at others according to the purpose at hand. Speak what builds others up according to their needs, that those who listen will benefit. We are speaking grace to the people around us. Get rid of the rotten words. Learn how to treat your words for the moment at hand, the purpose before you, so that it may bless those who hear. In conclusion, can I point out that my problem very often is not that I don't know what not to say. Okay, so I do say the wrong thing a lot. I will admit that. But usually I can identify when I've said the wrong thing. There's a joke I was listening to recently that says, saying I'm sorry and saying I'm apologize usually mean the same thing, but if you're at a funeral and you say I'm sorry, it means a very different thing than I say I apologize, right? The two words don't mean the same thing in that context. And knowing the wrong words to use, it's often easier to identify that problem. My struggle, the thing I find the hardest often, is to speak the right words at the right moment. Within this past week, I was called into the hospital to minister to a family who was in deep grief. I had never met them before. The hospital called and they said, we have a family here who wants a Baptist minister to come in and minister to them. Can you come? By the way, that was having left the hospital, that was a huge blessing. I was so blessed by this family. But I entered those doors praying, God, I have no idea what to say to these people. Do you know how to speak the right words in the right moment? I think James chapter 1 is a huge help to us to sort of come alongside what we read in Ephesians chapter 4:29. Let me finish with this. In James chapter 1, verses 19 to 25, this is what it says. My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to what? You know this. Quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry, right? Anger, right? So you've all heard it before. I'm not going to ask you to analyze my behaviors, but how about you look at how many of us have internalized that and made it part of our practice? Listen quickly, speak slowly. For man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth. There's that corruption, that decay, and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word that is implanted within you, which can save you. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like a man who looks at his face in a mirror, and after looking at himself goes away immediately forgetting what he looks like. But the man who looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues to do this, not forgetting what he has heard, but doing it, he will be blessed in what he does. To speak goodness and grace, we need to know two things. To speak goodness or grace, we need to know two things. First, we need to know our hearers and their needs. And you cannot know a person, you cannot know their situation, you cannot know their needs if you don't listen to them. How many of us, when someone comes to us with a problem, assume we understand before we even let them speak? And guys, maybe this is only me, but I have seen over and over again, we are problem solvers. We love solving problems. We love helping people by solving problems. When someone comes to me and says, I have a problem, my immediate response is, how can I help you solve it? I am amazed at how often I have solved the problem before they have even fully communicated it to me. To speak goodness and grace, you need to know your hearers, so listen quick. The second thing, if we want to speak grace and goodness, is that we need to know our God and who He is. his character. James says, you get rid of the filth and you humbly accept the word that is planted in you. That's the heart of everything we've been talking about. Jesus loves me. He gave himself for me, and he wants me to know him day by day more and more. If we want to get rid of the rotten apples, if we want to heat treat the steel, we need to know our hearers and listen well. But more even than that, we need to know our God and his word. Let's pray.